Do adults have a right to children, or do children have a right to adults? This is the question we're going to explore today. And we're going to start with two children's advocates. And we're going to do a deeper dive into who believes what, who's of the worldview that adults have a right to children, like same sex couples, IVF, surrogacy, communism, all say we have a right to children. But the opposite, children have a right to us. Who agrees with that? Well, Carl Jung agrees with that, and we're going to do a deep dive into Carl Jung in a little bit. But let's start with the two children's advocates who agree with Carl Jung that children have a right to us. So let's start there. Oh, here we go.
When it comes to the idea that all the child needs is love, what do you say about the right of two consenting adults to have children? How can that be legitimately denied?
Two consenting adults that would not be the
Same sex.
biological.
Yeah.
Because the child has no consent in the matter. In order to make a child in the lab with big fertility, which is, I believe, what you're referring to, which is frankly human trafficking. You are literally trafficking in children, putting prices on a child purchased, bought, and sold. Any of the stories in there talk so much about how they were paid for. They know what their price was, and it was $70,000, and that was it. No one has a right to possess a child that is not their biological child. Period. We don't have a right to children. Children have a right to us.
Big part of the flavor of your book is we give parents all sorts of rights, and adults can speak for themselves. We're not according the voiceless children who are too young to have a voice.
Yeah, they don't advocate for themselves. They don't blog. They don't submit amicus briefs. They don't author books. They don't do interviews with former deputy prime ministers, right? And yet they have rights. They have very concrete, natural rights that are recognized worldwide, but there's nobody to protect them. There's nobody to speak up for them, because by the time adults get to be adults, their self-interest drives most of these conversations about marriage and family. And
this self-interest, Jung would call ego inflation, which is adults have a right to children, where Jung would call ego humility is children have a right to adults.
So what do we need if we want a thriving society? What do we need if we want healthy, whole children who are safe and loved? We all have to become advocates for children on their behalf. So Stacey's spot on. This idea that I have a right to children, I have a right to parenthood, even that I have a right to marry. No, you actually don't. Children have a right to they have a right to life. They have a right to their mother and father. And all adults, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, must bend to that child right, because the only other alternative is for that child to bend to your desires. And that's an injustice.
Yes, and that when children bend to the desires of the adults, like she just explained, then the individuation process that children need to go to become a healthy individual as an adult gets blocked. And we're also going to look into a video from Dr. Gabor Mate, who subscribes to Jungian psychology for sure. He's a family medicine practitioner who specializes in how childhood trauma negatively impacts adults. And so we're going to hear a whole video from him about how children's need for attachment is one need they have. The other major need they have is authenticity. And if they're busy pleasing the parent because they're, doing a job the parent gave them, then they're not becoming a healthy individual. And we'll get into that a little bit later.
Need to be honest about the costly nature of a child coming forward and say they're being brought up in an LGBT home, used as a political pawn. The two people that are the most invested in them, that is, they're two moms, to speak to the father loss for a child in that environment is going to be extremely costly.
I mean, the majority of criminals in jail don't have a father figure. Now, I'm not saying that every same-sex couple that are women are going to produce children that are going to go to jail, but statistically, much more likely to end up a criminal without a father figure because of what healthy masculinity provides to a child. Healthy boundaries, logical thinking, how to behave in society. That's the father's role.
And we just need to be the adults in the room and recognize the very complex nature of what these kids are experiencing and see a little bit past, well, the kids are fine. I mean, the kids said so. The study said so, the self-reported study said so. We need to be a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more honest with childhood development. And
yeah, the two women here are Katie Faust and Stacey Manning. Stacey's talking right now. Katie is the other woman, but Katie has another video, and I'll link it below, where she goes into the studies that they did between 2005 and 2015, and how it was the vast majority was self-reported, which is not a healthy scientific process. They need to be able to have random samples. They need children to speak for themselves as adults. So, if we're only seeing an uptick in same-sex couples having children, we need to wait 20, 30 years so they can talk as adults. But that didn't happen. They just drew conclusions. Well, love makes a healthy family. Well, that's an idea. That's not reality. Reality is there's study after study after study showing that children need both biological parents. Children need the mother to learn how to process their internal world. Compassion, nurturing, forgiveness, creativity, intuition, all right brain, all feminine. Women also have more mirror neurons to do that emotional work with the child. The woman's nervous system is far more robust. So if you have two men at home, they don't have the natural instinct, the nervous system, the mirror neurons to do this process with the child, and the child doesn't learn how to regulate their emotions. And they have a maternal wound. It's a primal wound on the child. When we put adults' desire for children, even though they are physiologically incapable of having children, then we're denying the child's need for both biological parents to be in their life. It's a need. The woman teaches inside work, the man teaches outside work. And that can't be replicated. Like, this whole idea that men can be women and women can be men is just false. So we need to stop pretending like that's true for a convenient political tool. It's not true.
And what the kids are actually saying, because when they are anonymous, when they do have the freedom to speak clearly
Out of the
without
household.
when it's not costly,
Yeah.
they're not all right.
So you get a lot of research around, and there's been a lot of it bandied around in Australia, showing that that children who have grown up in same-sex parent households do every bit as well as anybody else, any other child, if not better.
Right. Yeah,
Fascinating how that works.
it's so great. Because the studies are self-reported. I think I made a joke I'm quite fond
Is this
of
Realville?
in our book in Realville. If the study were titled properly, it would have been titled essentially, homosexual parents are not as honest as heterosexual parents are about their children and their parenting quality. Self-reporting how my kid is doing when I know that there could be some serious political ramifications for how the study is used is about as unscientific as it comes.
Yeah. So all of those no difference studies that people cite and quote, and there's like some 75% studies show no difference in child outcomes, and like Stacey said, almost all of those studies are just asking the two moms, hey, does your kid like being
How are
fatherless?
they doing?
And they're like, they actually love it.
Oh,
like, we are the best parents. There's no abuse, there's no
Uh-huh.
depression, there's no anxiety. They're really, really happy.
Right.
And they also are not randomly derived participants, right? They're volunteer, they're recruited.
Right, in the same parenting group, of the
oftentimes
same
in the same
socioeconomic
cohort.
status.
Yeah. So this is my little thought exercise that I do when people are like, well, there's no difference.
It's like asking an echo chamber. Are we right? Yeah, we're right. We're all right. Yeah, we're good. We're better than everybody else. It's an echo chamber. That is not objective reality.
Difference, right? I'll say, okay, sociologists have been studying family structure for decades. And when you are not talking about same-sex parenting, they tend to agree on three things. Number one, biological parents advantage children in ways that unrelated adults do not. Number two, men and women offer distinct and complementary benefits to children. So different are the ways they engage with kids that there really is no such thing as parenting. There's mothering and there's fathering, and kids need both. And number three, they've seen that kids who lose a parent suffer trauma, whether that's through abandonment, even if they're subsequently adopted, through death, through third-party reproduction, or divorce, right? That there's harms and it diminishes child outcomes. So, since sociologists agree on all of this, why is it that magically, when you're talking about same-sex parenting, there's no difference?
There's no difference because love is love.
Right. Even though there's always a biological parent missing, they're always starved of the mothering or fathering that maximizes child development. And they've always suffered some kind of traumatic loss of a parent. Why do you think those studies show that there is no difference? And
I know. Politics. That's my guess.
It is. And then when you look at those no difference studies, you see there are deep methodological flaws about how they were conducted. They either self-reported, like Stacy said, they used very small sample sizes.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here and put the link below because we're going to get to the politics, like you said, in a second. I mean, how many news reports are we seeing now in January, February of 2026 that teachers are taking the kids, even in elementary school, out to protest ICE? Do adults, have a right to children, or do children have a right to adults? That's an interesting question we'll continue to explore. But let me just do the video with Dr. Gabor Mate because he does such a great job of showing, and he uses addiction as the challenge of illustrating why it's important for children to have both healthy attachment and a healthy authenticity. And when they can't have both, then this is where we run into challenges with raising children who have a secure attachment to self. So let me pull up his video now. It's very nicely illustrated by After School. Love that.
So an addiction is a complex psychological, physiological process, but which manifests in any behavior that a person enjoys, finds relief in, and therefore craves in the short term, but suffers negative consequences in the long term and doesn't give up despite the negative consequences. So craving pleasure, relief in the short term, negative consequences in the long term, inability to give it up. Now, notice I has said nothing about substances. I said any behavior. So it could be related to cocaine, crystal meth, heroin, fentanyl, marijuana, nicotine, alcohol.
Political activism could be anything, right? We're going to see a video in a second after this one about how a teacher is taking elementary students out to protest ICE. Parents all agree to that? Why is that the teacher's decision? Why is that part of going to school, as if children are supposed to go out there and engage in politics? I think it's in Australia, they're looking at lowering the voting age to 16. Why would they do that? They're only 6, they're not even adults yet. So, do adults have a right to children, or do children have a right to adults in a healthy society? Which way does it go?
Or whatever, could also be sex, gambling, internet, relationships, shopping, eating, work, extreme sports, working out, pornography, any number of human activities. So I said any behavior. Now, the official definition of addiction, according to the American Society for Addiction Medicine, is that this is it's a primary brain disorder. It arises in the brain, largely due to genetic reasons. This is how they see it. And I say that's just not true. The other popular idea about addiction is that it's a choice that somebody makes, that people choose to be addicted, which is what the legal system is based on. Because if people are not choosing, what are we punishing them for? And although I think the medical definition is closer to
like
the
I said, I don't know if it's 80 or 90% of men in jail did not have a father figure in the home. There it is, right? The problem is a choice. Addiction, swap that out with any, they could have killed someone, they could have stolen something, they could have any kind of, inappropriate behavior and gotten, arrested for it. Why are they doing that? Why do they do that and not others? Oh, the home. It all starts in the home. It all starts with the family. This is why there's study after study showing that a healthy nuclear family is the bedrock of a stable society. You lose the nuclear family, which in a lot of ways we have in America, in the West. We have population collapse, exorbitant divorce, kids born out of wedlock like 60% of the time, where they're 11 times more likely to be abused. 40 to 60% of kids, depending on the study, do not have a secure attachment to self, meaning they're mentally ill. About the same number of adults as well. This is what happens when we put money and convenience over health and well-being. Convenience. Oh, surrogacy. IVF. I can have a kid. Oh, IVF. Oh, I'm a single woman and I want a kid because I don't want to be lonely. So now the kid already has a job, right? Which is adults have rights to kids. So let me go to a sperm bank. No father.
truth, I don't see it as genetic. It's a genetic disorder, and I don't see it as a primary brain disorder. So let me perhaps show you why, if that's okay. A human being has two fundamental needs, apart from the physical needs in infancy, in childhood. One is for attachment. Now, attachment is the closeness and proximity with another human being for the sake of being looked after.
And children bond with the mother. Women are physiologically designed to bond with infants, with our more robust nervous system, our extra mirror neurons. We're the emotional center. This is how we teach them how to have a secure attachment to themselves. It starts with the mother and the inside work, with the nurturing and the compassion, the right brain, the feminine. Lose this and then that comes all the mental illness and all the other challenges.
Or for the sake of looking after the other. Now, human beings, as mammals and even birds, are creatures of attachment. We have to connect and attach because otherwise we don't survive. If there's nobody that's motivated to take care of us, to attach to us that way, and we're not motivated to attach to others, we just can't survive. One interesting thing is that the endorphins, which are the body's internal opiate chemicals, which heroin and all the other opiates resemble, they help to facilitate attachment. So if you take infant mice and you knock out their endorphin receptors so they don't have endorphin opiate activity in their brain, they won't cry for help and separate from their mothers, which would mean that they would die in the wild. And which goes back to what happens in childhood when there's stress and trauma, these endorphin systems don't develop.
This is what happened with my older daughter. My older daughter, when I gave birth to her, I went back to work 3 weeks later in January. Well, 2 weeks later, I was septic with bacterial pneumonia, and I spent 2 weeks in ICU on a ventilator and 5 days on 100% oxygen. When I came home, my daughter, who was about 8, 9 weeks old then, was tracking on my mom. She had attached to my mother. Now, thankfully, my mother was there, but the stress and the trauma impacted her neurological system, and now she's not attached to me, and we still have that challenge where she just kind of subconsciously looks for other mothers because what did she internalize? Mom's gone, mom's dead. No mom. So mom's dead means I don't have a secure attachment to my femininity, so I'm going to look for it all outside of myself. Well, when we have an external locus of control, like an abusive parent that we can't, individuate from, who doesn't allow us because we're so busy pleasing them and appeasing them, then that's the stress and trauma, and that stops our ability to facilitate a healthy attachment to self. It's this important.
And then when people do heroin, it feels like a warm, soft hug to them. They feel love and connection for the first time. That's why it's so powerful. But so we have this need for attachment, without which obviously the human infant, who is the most helpless, the most dependent, the least mature of any creature in the universe at birth, cannot survive without the attachment. And that attachment relationship, given that we have the longest period of development of any creature, well into adolescence and beyond, attachment is not a negotiable need. But we have another need, which is authenticity. Now, authenticity, outward the self, means being connected to ourselves, just knowing what we feel and being able to act on it. So that means our gut feelings. So let's look at how human beings evolved. For hundreds of thousands of years, and for 100,000 years or so, this species existing on Earth, how did we live? We didn't live in cities and houses and so on. We lived out there in the wild until very recently in human existence. Now, just how long do you survive in the wild if you're not connected to your gut feelings? Not very long. If you start using your intellect instead of your gut feelings, you just don't survive.
I'll give an example. Like, there's tons of videos showing bears in Florida climbing a tree. Like, I saw a video with 5 bears up in one tree in Florida 24 hours before, like, Hurricane Helene. I think it was a Category 5 hurricane hit, because they follow their gut instincts. In the 1920s, they killed all the wolves in Yellowstone because they're inconvenient. Then they had ecological problems because the wolves weren't there. So they brought them back. The wolves instinctually solved all the ecological problems, and it's called a trophic cascade, and saved 93 billion. How important are gut feelings? Just saying.
That's a powerful survival need as well. So attachment is a survival need. Authenticity is a survival need. But what happens if your authenticity threatens your attachment relationships? For example, as a 2-year-old, you get angry because you didn't get that cookie before dinner. But your parents can't handle anger because they grew up in homes when there was rageaholism, and they're terrified at the very expression of anger. So they give you the message that good little kids don't get angry. The message you receive is not that good little kids don't get angry, but that angry little kids don't get loved. Because your parents are now sullen, they won't look at you, they talk to you in a harsh way, you're not getting loved. Not experiencing love at that moment. No, but you got to stay attached. Guess what you're going to suppress? The authenticity every time. And this is how we lose connection to ourselves and to our gut feelings. So that, strangely enough, that very dynamic, which is essential for human survival in a natural setting, now becomes a threat to our survival in this more modern setting, where to stay authentic is to threaten attachment. And so we give up our authenticity, and then we wonder who the hell we are, and whose life is this, and who's experiencing all this, and this life doesn't, and who am I really? And so that's where the reconnection has to happen. That's where the healing happens, is with that reconnection. But it's because of that conflict, the tragic conflict in childhood between authenticity and attachment that most of us face, that we lose ourselves and lose connection to our gut feelings. Now, this leads to the question of trauma, because it's one thing to recognize that all this originates in childhood pain. It's quite another to transform that pain. And for that, we have to understand what trauma is. So people often think that trauma is what happens to you. So trauma is a divorce when you were small and your parents fighting. Trauma is your mother's depression. Trauma is your father's alcoholism. Trauma is your parents' argumentation. Trauma is physical or sexual abuse or some loss. Those aren't the traumas. Those are traumatic. But the trauma is not what happens to you.
It's how you internalize it. Like you saw the mother and the child. The mother, good kids don't get angry. And the child internalized that as angry kids don't get loved. So it's not that they were all, on different wavelengths. It's just what children hear is different than what you say. And then there's the dissonance. There's the disconnect. There, it kills the attachment. It kills the authenticity. There's the problem.
And as a result of these traumatic events, what happens inside you is you get disconnected from your emotions, and you're disconnected from your body, and you have difficulty being in the present moment, And you develop a negative view of your world and a negative view of yourself and a defensive view of other people. And these perspectives keep showing up in your life in the present. So in other words, the addiction is not the primary problem. It's an attempt to solve a problem. And then the real question is, how did the problem arise? In other words, this is where my theory is that it's always rooted in childhood trauma, and that the addiction is an attempt to deal with the effects of childhood trauma, which it does temporarily, while it creates even more problems in the long term. And so the issue is not just to recognize what happened 10, 15, 30, however many years ago, but to actually recognize the manifestations in the present moment and to transcend them. And how do you do that? By reconnecting with yourself, by restoring the connection with your body primarily, and with your emotions.
And,
that you
I can
lost.
share a study about how the Lakota handle healing trauma. They engage both sides of the brain for full coherence between the feminine and the masculine, where talk therapy only engages the feminine. There's no engagement of the masculine. What they do in Lakota is, and then John Hopkins studied this, is that they take people out to a river and they collect like 6 stones, and then they attach meaning to each stone. And while throwing the stone back in the river, they vocalize their pain, saving the last stone to remember the person that they lost. But they engage, action is masculine and communication is feminine, and that restores coherence to the nervous system, inner calm.
And once you do, when you found these things again, then you have what we call recovery. Because what does it mean to recover something? It means to find it again. So what is it that people find when they recover? They find themselves. And the loss of self is the essence of trauma. So the real purpose of addiction treatment, mental health treatment, any kind of healing is reconnection.
Thank you, Monte. Love him. He is wonderful. Okay. Oh, wow. I love Dr. Monte. He just explains things so clearly, and he really helps me understand the connection between childhood trauma and the impact on adults, which is his specialty. Okay, let's watch this video of teachers putting children to work for their own political needs. That is definitely, adults have a right to children. Okay, and they do this in communism. They, like I was taught as a child to stand up for racism. And I called my grandpa a racist in public at 12 years old, as if that's appropriate. But I was encouraged to do it from school. Just saying, it's a problem. Okay.
These teachers, I believe, belong in jail. The kids in your class are not tools for you to use for whatever propaganda you support. And that goes for both sides of the aisle. Fire this woman now.
So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents, or kids.
Sorry, wait, what? Wait, I have 3 kids. What do you mean break that kids belong to their parents? In Germany, homeschooling is illegal. Well, Germany has a history of being quite controlling, right? I mean, wow. Break this idea that kids belong to their, what? That's what? But that goes along with adults have a right to children, which Carl Jung, and we're going to show in a second, that is unhealthy, not psychologically sound. That's ego inflation and not ego humility. And ego inflation is the mental illness.
Belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities.
Right. Do whole communities pay for and take care of when they're crying and sick? Did a whole community take care of my 3 kids? Because they weren't here. What do you mean whole community? What? That's communism. That's the Industrial Revolution took hold of our children. That's why the Supreme Court had to step in, give women the right to vote, and the woman independent, and then send them to the workforce, and then take the kids, put them in daycare, separate them, then they sent the kids to work at 8, 9 years old. So the kids were fueling the Industrial Revolution. That's adults have a right to kids. Do you think that's healthy?
These are not somebody else's children. They're all our children. The chosen family will fill the void when your biological family wasn't there.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
What, parents aren't in charge of what's being taught? Right. I mean, when that happens, this is the problem that we're having, like all the LGBT in the schools, all the asking a 5-year-old, what's your pronoun? As if that's healthy. Shoving, talking about sex and having elementary school kids having access to books with sex and sodomy. That's healthy?
Someone's gotta teach them how to hate. We're coming for them. We're coming for your children.
How many LGBTQ kind of protests have you seen? They've sung, "We're coming for your children." Did you know that the queer theory includes the destruction of the nuclear family, as does now National Organization for Women, the Charter, destruction of the nuclear family. And the early feminists, not early, but the feminists in the 60s and 70s, were arguing they had to force women to abandon their families. It's the only way women could be free. Well, where's the next generation going to come from? And what do you mean free? Free from being a feminine woman? Whoa. So I'm going to stop sharing this here because it just gets to be a bit much for me. We're coming for your children. No, you're friggin' not. Okay, so let's just go to ChatGPT and do a deep dive into Carl Jung. And because I asked this question, the sentence, "We don't have a right to children, they have a right to us." I put that in because exactly what the woman said in the video is deeply resonant from a Jungian perspective, okay? Jung would likely hear it not as political rhetoric, but as a statement about psychological responsibility, projection, and individuation. Individuation is how a child goes from a really attached infant, which is necessary and healthy, to 18 years later, a grown, mature adult who's ready to leave the home. So let's unpack this. Children are not extensions of the ego. So children aren't extensions of the parents. When we see them as extensions of us, like the teacher wants to protest, so her, elementary school kids are too, that's an extension of what the ego. That's not healthy. It's like we're giving them work based on what we want. That, political activism, right? So let's dive in more here. So Jung repeatedly warned that parents unconsciously project onto children unlived ambitions. My children aren't responsible for my ambitions. I'm responsible to help them to their ambitions flourish. Suppressed desires. Well, I'm lonely, so I want a kid. Why does the kid already have a job and they're an infant? Is that healthy? Moral ideals, social status needs, narcissistic fulfillment. When parents believe they have a right to children, psychologically it can mean the child exists to complete me. Now, it's probably a subconscious thing, but that is ego appropriation and there's no individuation there. From a Jungian view, that blocks both the parents and the child's individuation. The child as an autonomous psyche. Jung believed every person carries the self archetype, an innate blueprint towards wholeness. A child is not raw material. A child is already a psyche unfolding. So the phrase, "they have a right to us," implies the child has a right to protection, a right to containment, a right to guidance, a right to space for their own becoming. And let's talk about guidance. This whole trans kids thing. Well, I don't know what you are, but you tell me. Where's the guidance? Where's the containment? Where's the protection? Where's the space for their own becoming? Where's, and that's denying that we mirror ourselves to the children so they learn how to become healthy adults. This aligns strongly with Jung's idea that parents must not dominate the child's individuation path. Hey, ho, ho, Heist has got to go. Where's the individuation there? They're children. They're being taught to protest against the federal government, which is getting people arrested? What? And killed? In Jungian symbolism, The child archetype represents new possibility, future transformation, renewal of life. You know, those people that project onto children and make them act like them, they're still under their own parents. They aren't healthy inside of themselves to understand that that child's an individual, and that child's needs is a 5-year-old's needs. And a 5-year-old does not need to protest. They're 5. If a parent approaches children as a right, it often signals ego inflation. If a parent approaches children as a responsibility, it reflects ego humility. Humility is required for individuation. So children have a right to adults fuels a healthy individuation process. Adults have a right to children fuels an unhealthy individuation process where the child remains unhealthily attached to the parent way into adulthood, like I did. I only got unattached in the last year or so, and I'm 55. The archetype of the divine child. Jung wrote extensively about the divine child archetype, the fragile but powerful symbol of new consciousness. Psychologically, harming or controlling a child is symbolically attacking future potential, blocking new consciousness, forcing the past to repeat itself. So to say children have a right to us is to say the future has a claim on our maturity. Okay? Shadow dimension. When adults feel entitled to children, shadow elements can emerge. Possessiveness, identity fusion, political activism, control, narcissism, moral rigidity. All unhealthy. When adults recognize children's rights to care, they must confront their impatience, their unresolved wounds, their projections, their need for control. This is shadow work. This is the healing work. This is healing your trauma. Parenthood becomes a catalyst for individuation. So when new parents haven't individuated from their own parents, this is now another opportunity when they have their own, when they approach parenthood, that children have a right to care by the adults, not adults have a right to children. When they have the kind of the hierarchy, right? that adults are there to care for children. Children aren't there to appease the adults. The reversal of power. The phrase flips the hierarchy. Instead of adult equals authority, child equals subordinate possession. It becomes adult equals the steward and the child an unfolding psyche. So the adult provides guidance to the unfolding psyche, and that is healthy. So in Jungian terms, this reflects a move from patriarchal domination towards conscious responsibility. So the adult is the authority, the child is subordinate possession, is patriarchal domination. Everyone's complaining about the patriarchy. They are just unaware. Individuation through parenthood. Jung believed children often carry the unconscious conflicts of their parents. He famously said, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. And then they want that child to go do this and go do that and, live through the children. That happened to my son. I wasn't healthy and their dad wasn't healthy. My son's an Eagle Scout. And his dad told him, oh, your Eagle Scout's half mine. What? I went to college. I had a master's degree. The instructors helped me learn. Is my degree half theirs? No. The Eagle Scout is half his dad's? No, that's my son's. You can only get an Eagle Scout until you're 18 years old. So his dad was way over 18, so how could it be his? Narcissism. But that's his childhood trauma. If children have a right to us, then we must live our lives honestly, integrate our shadow, heal our nervous system, remain calm. Children coming into our lives are a huge gift because these challenges that we face help us confront our shadow, help us turn our wounds into wisdom and become more emotionally mature adults, which is why we come on this planet. We're souls having a human experience to become more emotionally mature. Okay? So, when children have a right to us, then we must not burden them with our unfinished destiny. Okay? Parenting becomes ethical individuation. The final Jungian interpretation. We don't have a right to children. They have a right to us. Children are not ego possessions. They are autonomous souls. Parenthood is stewardship, not ownership. Stewardship. You see those people saying, oh, children are kind of owned by the community. They didn't talk about being stewards and guidance, that they like have a right to the kids. The child's psyche deserves containment and protection. The future demands our maturity. Okay? How mature is it to take a 5-year-old to a protest? Or babies, infants? Okay. All right. This is, I'll stop sharing this. I think I've gone on long enough on this topic, but I'm sure I'll swing back around another time. Please like and subscribe the video. Thank you for listening. I hope it gave you a lot to think about as I think about these topics all the time. All right. Take care. Bye.